think we'll get started so that our guests have the time they need. So welcome. This is our May general meeting for New York City VOAD. My name is Zach Hodson. I'm the Emergency Services Director for the Salvation Army here in New York. I get to co-chair the Board of Directors of New York City VOAD with Ray Droz from City Harvest, who's actually joining us from the National VOAD meeting out in Phoenix this morning. But this morning we wanted to recognize May as National Mental Health Awareness Month. And in our field, when I think of mental health, I think of vibrant emotional health. So I've asked them to come join this morning and present on a new model that they've developed. So I'm going to introduce Amy Dominguez, director of their crisis team, and she'll introduce her guests.
Thanks, Zach. I'm really excited to be here this morning. I'm actually also in Phoenix at the NVOAD conference. That's been a really great conversation so far, and really great to be and meet with everyone. This morning, I'm going to introduce two members of our board and the co-chairs of our Disaster Advisory Committee, Drs. Sandra Koyfman and Dr. Grant Brenner. They'll provide the context of the development of this model and a little bit about it. We're going to do a brief overview of it, but do want to extend the invitation that if you'd like to have a longer conversation around this model and the implications of it, my email is in the chat, and we are happy to schedule a separate meeting with you to dive in a little bit deeper. So without further ado, I will pass it off to Dr. Koyfman and Dr. Brenner. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Amy. And happy to be here and happy to introduce Grant. Here are some of our credentials, and my apologies, I have a dual screen setup. If you see me looking away, I'm still very much paying attention and participating, just looking at where the slides are being displayed. And we have been working with Amy and with Vibrant for very many years. And Grant, I will hand over to you to just give a couple of kind of background notes to where the model comes from. I just wanted to say that the primary hope and primary use for the model is to think about how it can be used in your day-to-day planning and tabletop activities. We did a tabletop yesterday at the American Psychiatric Association, and just the ability to visualize not just the present, not what is in front of you, but looking into the future is the most useful and applicable thing about the model. So please try to think in those terms, how this can be useful when you're having a real-time conversation in your planning sessions or your tabletop exercises. And Grant.
Thank you, Amy and Sander. Thanks everyone for your time this morning. And submissions for the We the Resilient Behavioral Health Conference, October 1st through 3rd in Nashville, close on May 15th. I know some folks on the call have already submitted for panels or workshops, and thank you for that. This model, the model for adaptive response to complex cyclical disasters, we tried to be accurate with the name, and thankfully the acronym is manageable. Sander and I sit on a committee for the Group for the Advancement of Psychiatry. I co-chair the Committee on Disaster Trauma and Global Health. And in March, April of 2020, as the pandemic was starting to pick up steam, there were also wildfires that were in the news and raging in California, and a number of other disasters. And we were having our committee meeting and thought we would like to have a way to conceptualize multiple different types of disasters occurring and overlapping in time at different scales, affecting different populations. And so we just started thinking about a systems level model that could be filled in with details to cover different stakeholder groups and different elements of response that we're all familiar with. To a significant extent, this model is based on data, from basic physiological data to best practices in disaster and crisis response. And you'll see there's multi-components. I'll put the link in the chat in case it isn't, so people can also pull it up. And so with that, we kind of did a back of the napkin sketch. We took this model from GAP. We went to Vibrant Emotional Health, and with a company called Decision Point Systems, assembled a team of interdisciplinary experts, including some people from the Uniformed Services University, and developed ultimately the model you see here today. Thanks for the link, Sander. Sander, I'll turn it over to you for any more intro or additional background.
Of course. And if you follow the link, it will give you the more fluid, interactive form of the graphic and the presentation. So it's designed to be easy enough to navigate. But if you do consider using it for your own tabletop exercises or for your own map of how you would be approaching disaster planning, I'd encourage you to download using this link and to print it out. It will be a very long printout, but it does make it easier to see everything at a glance.
Yep, and it's open source with proper attribution. If you want to use it, I just dropped that language that's at the bottom of the page into the chat box as well.
So what we hope to accomplish today is, after the conversation, you would have words and tools, and we spent nearly 2 years refining the language, and we know that we didn't get it all right. So what you may need to do is adjust for your specific situation. We try to be high level enough and broad enough in our language, thinking about how we want to really call out the attention to particular groups, to particular situations. At the end of the day, this is a conversation starter. It's not all-inclusive model. It is a model that allows you to add what's relevant, to think about the stakeholders that are specific, but it's broad enough to allow for the conversation to be an effective one, and to make it a little harder to miss key stakeholders, to miss key points that would be worth considering in disaster planning, including pre-disaster planning. And that's really the general approach that we hope can get people to the place where, without having the experience of living through a disaster, you can have at least a starting point and thinking and anticipating what the needs of your particular community of care may be. So when we think through these various stages, and Grant started the conversation about how do we really think about when it's not a single disaster. It's unfortunately never so neat, where something starts in a particularly strong community with no pre-existing issues, and then neatly ends after 1 year of dealing with it. So thinking about what sort of overlaps are going to happen, and what you should anticipate, what community members may be already at a disadvantage before anything happened. Their crisis may have already been afoot for months, for years. Particular members of the community, low income, LGBTQ plus, displaced, insular communities with specific language needs, may not even have the means of asking for help before a particular event stresses the community even further. So you want to start thinking about how you identify those community members ahead of time.
Yeah, some of the data on communities is going to make sense to people. We're also working on a textbook revision of disaster psychiatry, readiness evaluation and treatment. And I was researching the communication chapter, and there's some very interesting material. I think it's good to point out, although we have certain kinds of expertise, the communities that we work with, as Sander is saying, all have their own specific experiences, and also they have their own expertise. And from an ethnographic perspective, like an anthropologic perspective, we don't go in as experts, right? We go in as kind of consultants and listeners and construct an ecosystem for information sharing and preparation and action together.
And when we start thinking about how to approach disaster planning, you do want to have a basic framework of where something starts and where hopefully it ends. But what is useful to remember is there is always a chance of yet another event approaching the community. So you may be living at the same time in the impact and anticipation stage. The easiest thing to think about, earthquakes. I live in New Jersey, and we recently had a completely inconsequential earthquake. Well, it was completely inconsequential as far as physical distraction. It was not quite an innocent event, fun to watch on TV from a psychological perspective. People were still worried, still calling emergency services, still trying to understand, do I need to evacuate? Do I need to do anything specific for my pets? Do I need to get my kids out of school? All of these questions were being asked. But not only they were being asked, one of the things that was happening after all the messaging went out about how this was not a major event was the news of the aftershocks. So here you are in the adaptation stage where the event already happened, yet there is the follow-up event. And it's sort of easier when it's the same thing, but it doesn't necessarily solve all the problems when it's the same thing.
Right, and these phases are non-linear. You can sort of slide back and forth like chutes and ladders, like the children's game.
And Grant,
Yeah, so I think this is a familiar concept. The idea is that we can be overregulated or underregulated when it comes to stress response. And this is reminiscent of those cards that show kind of green to red for individuals to track themselves. What we've done is we've made the zone in the middle and indicated that the outside edges are kind of either over or underregulated. So for example, not getting enough rest is being underregulated, or being overregulated, kind of shutting down or being too controlling. And this can apply, to groups or systems as well as individuals. In the interest of time, I think we'll go through a quick overview, but we'd happy to talk more about this with folks another time too. The faces of disaster, there are plenty of other stakeholder groups, but we tried to identify the core groups, which are also often overlapping: survivors, community leaders, and responders. We know very well that we can both be responders as well as people who are affected directly by disasters. Other groups that aren't included could be stakeholders like policy makers, governmental agents, and we also hope to use this model to further better awareness and support for the work we do with those stakeholder groups like policymakers.
And something to also remember, it will be quite obvious for many of the folks on this call, you can be part of multiple groups at the same time. So the issues will overlap. You can be a community leader and survivor. You can be a responder and worry about your family members in the community and so on and so forth. So when you think about these overlaps, it hopefully can also inform what we hope is a useful framework of key actions to adaptive mitigation of stress. So when we can look at one row at a time, this is a simplified view where you can think about survivors in various stages, from anticipation to impact to adaptation to growth and recovery, are going to deal with certain tasks. So will the community leaders, so will the responders. So what we hope is when we can look at what tasks the survivors would be undertaking at particular stages of coping with a disaster. So, for example, if there is participate in culturally attuned memorials for collective remembering and grieving, that is a signal to the community leaders in the impact stage and the anticipation stage to in fact prepare to create the environment where the memorials can take place. So this is in fact a signal for the responders to understand that at this point where the memorials need to be taking place, additional supports may be needed for the community members, for those vulnerable who might need to stay at home, for example, underage children and the elderly, where someone attending the memorial will need someone to be watching those that they are taking care of.
Right. So on a high level, this kind of tool can serve as a shorthand to be able to kind of locate like where your action steps are. And these boxes, you can imagine, sorry to interrupt, Sander, that we can also develop this where you can click on them and it can zoom in on specific resources, have links to handouts that are useful, and allow us to help aggregate information from many, many different sources in one place where it's easy to get it when you need it.
So when we think about what that approach allows us to do is to think about the future needs, but the other thing that we would want to consider in tabletop or in planning or real response is to think about how do we factor the foundational issues that may be impacting the community? What are the chronic stressors that the community is facing? And now you have the first disaster and possibly overlapping with second disaster. What would that mean when we look at the community stress load on the y-axis here? And of course, with every overlapping stressor, the load grows. So what are the protective factors that can smooth this pile? And what are the impairing factors that can continue worsening and building up the stress? So we want to amplify what would be protective, and we want to be prepared to deal with the impairing factors. So it's a graphic, but we hope it is a useful reminder to consider that without the understanding of the local community, you can be missing some of these water stones that will impair your ability to be effective.
Right. And again, it's like a cognitive tool because we know that when we're stressed and in the midst of a response, we don't easily think of all the details. It's good to have various tools so that you remember the important things, and then you don't have to remember to remember. And so that frees us up to be most effective.
And similarly, when you think about a particular community, how do you really effectively calculate what is the capacity of the community to cope? And this is what we're calling out and calling community balance sheet. And you can think about what sort of template your particular organization could use to create that matrix of preparedness and response. So if you were to consider just one disaster hitting the community, this would be your matrix one. But what happens when, not if, when there is a second event? What happens when there is a third event? So if we can prompt that conversation, if we can give you a visual of how do you consider a situation where you are maybe in the adaptation stage, but the resources are being now shared between two competing events. Floods and fires will in fact ask for competing resources. So what happens when that happens? How will that impact your ability to move to the recovery stage? What happens when there is a third event, when you're deploying your resources in one part of the community, but the other community nearby where you pull those resources from is impacted? So more you're able to zoom out and think about how you are going to prep for a situation like this, the more prepared you will be. And this is just a reminder once again that we are calling for this sort of multifactorial approach where isolating and preparing just for a single event is simply not good enough. And the experience really shows that you need to be able to pull in additional resources. You need to know what your second and third layer of defenses are when you're really engaging in a complex response. So, Grant, do you want to take the first vignette?
Well, I think it's 10:25 almost. So, you know, if we were doing a full training, right, we would go into more detail on the prior slides, and we would also go through a couple of vignettes and really try to simulate like what would happen. So, let's say your call center is overwhelmed or you don't have enough water. And definitely those types of tabletop exercises I've done 20 years ago, right, with VOAD in New York. And they help us to identify what needs to happen. So, that
Yeah,
would be the
that's fair.
purpose of those.
Right. And the one thing I would encourage to think about is also having done a tabletop exercise today doesn't mean that it's going to be relevant tomorrow. Meaning, don't let your plans stay stale, become stale. You really need to make sure that there is familiarity, there is a routine refreshing of the staff. You need to know who you're going to be able to call. What's that index card that is attached to the binder where you know whom to call when you must call now?
Yep. And there's some
So
excellent comments in the chat as well. About different things that can be done or the ways this overlaps with our current models. It's really, do we have a few minutes to take questions or comments?
yeah, we have 5 minutes. I will go for that. And you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask a question or make a comment, or you can write. Someone's commenting that the overlay of the disaster management life cycle preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation would be a helpful approach. So there are many of these great opportunities and ideas, and we would love to hear what they are so we can make it easier for folks and make it potentially, and Amy, we could think about potentially making these additional models available as links side by side, so making it easier for someone to navigate to some of these suggested models, so folks don't need to reinvent the wheel. So this is, I think, something that is quite doable for us. Go ahead.
Yeah. Who is your target audience for these models?
So, great question. Target audience becomes anyone who's trying to find their place in disaster. You can be a community member, so you know what to anticipate from the responders. It can be a responder, knowing what to ask for or how to anticipate the needs of the community. And of course, for administrators and planners to think about these larger issues, uh, especially if they don't necessarily have the lived experience of managing a disaster response. So all of the people that we try to mention in the graphic.
Yeah, this is kind of a blueprint. It can be adapted and expanded for a variety of different stakeholder groups, from, responders to policymakers, et cetera. Yeah.
And Jill, just to pop in really quickly, I have personally used this model within a leadership training I do for nonprofit leaders that are working in disaster. So I think it runs on a scale of, or a spectrum, I should say, of like highly academic and highly applicable. So I am not the clinician in the room. I'm a program person. And so I often utilize this in kind of giving people anchoring points to consider when they're looking at preparedness plans or staff wellness, or their own personal, health and well-being. So just for context, there's some different layers you can apply.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I mean, I'm thinking there were a couple of things that really struck me as applicable for the work that I do in community preparedness, especially when I go out and do outreach after a large scale event or a dramatic event. Sometimes they're not large scale, but they're dramatic.
Yep.
And and it really hit me. So I wanted to see if there was a way I could use it to, improve my own work and the work of our team.
Yeah, let's set up a meeting. We'd love to kind of think that
Okay.
through with
Well,
you.
I copied your email.
Oh, great. Awesome. Well, we want to be cognizant of the fact that you have another presentation this morning. So Zach, thank you for having us. And as I mentioned, if anybody would like to get in touch, my email's in the chat and Zach has my contact info. Thank you very much to all of you for all that you do. We're grateful.
Thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks so much to the good doctors and to Amy. I think you've given us a lot to think about, and I appreciate that you've given us resources to keep thinking about it, and place it in our context. That's helpful. So yes, we'll now move on to our next presenter, who will be Adela Rodriguez from the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. She's the director of the Behavioral Health Office in the Office of Emergency Preparedness and Response, to speak to us a bit about what's available through the city as far as mental health access. So I'll give it to Adela.
Okay, great. Thank you. And it is really nice to be here in this room with all of you. Some names, I was looking at the names. So hi to you. It's been a while. So I hope everyone can see me and hear me. I don't have a slide, so you'll just get to see me and hear from me. So I want to share a little bit about what my office does and has been doing. And I want to first say to Vibrant, thank you for that. That was a really informative slides, a really wonderful way to really a great tool for the membership here. So just to talk a little bit about BOPR, as we are known, Behavioral Health, Office of Emergency Preparedness and Response. What is our role? Our role is to lead a coordinated response to the mental health needs of New Yorkers that are generated by disasters or other really big public health emergencies. So I'm going to set the stage as to what we do, and then I'm going to move towards what we're currently working on, just to give you an idea of what we do in action. So preparing and planning for the mental health needs, as we know, for New Yorkers, it's not an easy feat, especially in a city as diverse as New York. It's a complex task. It really encompasses community preparedness, best practices, training, credentialing, really identifying and organizing responders. It's conducting needs assessments. Really, what's the mental health need? And it's developing systems and protocols to refer those who might need that longer term mental health and ongoing support. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we do. What is it my office does for planning and preparedness? It really includes increasing community awareness of the psychological impact of disasters through community outreach, collaboration, and forums like this. It's really working with response partners, psychoeducation to really help educate communities and individuals to help them prepare for that unexpected and help them cope with the trauma through whether it's tip sheets, guidance documents, informational learning sessions, training programs. And we geared those and we're trying to really build up, COVID impacted everyone, all programming. So we're really trying to get back to working with those community and religious leadership groups. Our training program, it is really has grown since COVID. Uh, we're still providing our basic PFA. That's really the basis of any disaster mental health program. So we've included stress management, um, dealing with grief, and that really stemmed and grew after, unfortunately, COVID. We're working to provide that all hazard disaster mental health really is the fundamental basics of our response team. Uh, Looking at communication, we're training on the fundamentals of risk communication because how you share and impart information really determines and can impact whether stress increases or decreases. Of course, we train and work with faith and community leaders, mental health professionals, um, We look to really bring more trainings to our own staff, right? We forget we're New Yorkers as well, and we're at the front lines. So we're really trying to really elevate that training for our colleagues across the municipalities and city agencies. One major training we do focuses on our response team. When an event occurs, how do we respond? We have developed the resilience and emotional support team, the REST team. They're really at the forefront when an event happens, a large scale event. They're at the forefront, providing that PFA and assisting those to cope better with the event at hand. Another crucial part of planning involves participating in drafting of citywide plans. So our office is really active in the citywide planning. We are always knocking on the door, reminding them of the mental health impact. We have to keep knocking on the door, so we are ensure that it's included in the coastal storm planning, the family assistance planning. In fact, I was at JFK yesterday at a training hosted by Homeland and NTSB to really begin looking at and improving where we can the fact plan. And of course, we know facts are open when there's a multiple casualty incident, 10 or more fatalities. So that's part of the planning work to ensure mental health is considered when the city is planning for large scale responses. Of course, we participate in exercises, roundtable discussions. And as I said, we maintain throughout when we're not actively utilizing members of the REST team, we're engaging them. We are increasing their learning opportunities because we know when volunteers are readily engaged, they're more prone to respond when needed. So you heard a little bit about that planning phase. So when disaster unfortunately strikes, right, we know it's not if, but when. Our response plan. What is our response plan? We convene, we coordinate that mental health response in the acute phase of the psychological impact, the stress reactions caused by citywide disasters or public health emergency. When we know we've dealt with a big public health emergency back to back, right, from COVID to monkeypox, the hits kept coming. So we provide disaster mental health services. We provide that through the REST team. And our primary role is to strengthen that natural resilience and the capacity and capability to adapt. How do we do that? We availed ourselves to webinars, that guidance. We worked with our providers so they can maintain their workforce, so they can help their constituents, their members. We provided that tip sheets, right? The cycle education material to really reduce individual and group stress. We look at the mental health needs assessment to really determine what is the level of the psychological impact. Our really guiding tool is the mental health assessment tool. That mental health assessment really helps guide our work. It determines the best use of resources, and it helps us identify the linkages the community needs to really be more resilient. Uh, what else do we do? We hold webinars, whether it is to our provider agencies, communities at large, and of course our workforce. So that is the response. We heard about the planning, the response, and the recovery. What can we implement? What lessons learned can we bring with us to mitigate certain aspects from reoccurring? So we coordinate and administer programs addressing the longer term mental health needs created by any given incident. So that can be the CCP program. So you're aware of Project Hope. That was initially Project Hope was after Hurricane Sandy, and again after COVID. In fact, the CCP for Project Hope, because they found that it worked so well, that model of teams penetrating communities, that they continue to fund it through the state, and it is called COMPS, Community Outreach Mental Health Programs. So we continue to increase that awareness of the psychological impact and really improving communities' decision-making capacities and capabilities, whether it's through local tabletop exercises and drills, really looking at the lessons learned and how to incorporate those into our future response plan. Again, through providing assistance and guidance and really promoting that responder self-care. We want to take a more of a deeper dive, as I mentioned, into the staff to responder care. How can we really protect and help elevate the resilience of that workforce? So you heard a little bit about the office's planning work, the response and preparedness. So I want to talk a little bit about um, some of our current projects. And I do want to emphasize that through your ongoing participation in VOED, you have access to community disaster mental health information, and you're in prime positions to really disseminate the information and really to help promote this community mental health resiliency. And we look to really building up our relationship with VOED. We were heavily involved with VOED, and we want to become, again, really share uh, the expertise and learn from your expertise how we can really make New Yorkers really more resilient. So we look forward to that. So that's why I'm really happy to be here to kind of reignite this working relationship together and really aim to collaborate more. I know we got a lot of calls during COVID. How can we be of service? COVID was a very interesting time, a lot of lessons learned. So we look forward to implementing what we learned into these future working collaborative efforts. So after COVID struck, we began taking a look at uh, more mayoral initiatives, and we just worked on, and I'm going to highlight two of them. The subway outreach. You may be familiar with it. If not, that's okay. I shall share. The subway outreach initiative was high on our mayor's list to really look at and address the homeless that was rampant and mental ill individuals who appeared to be homeless residing in the subway. So our work was really a collaborative effort with the Department of Homeless Services and NYPD. So we were taking the best of the best from these three agencies to really look at and how to address this need. How do you address apparent homelessness in the subway? And it was looking at the municipal workforce, as I said, looking at what are the expertise of the Department of Health. So we quickly hired a cadre of RNs, clinicians as well. And we partnered with the mental health Department of Homeless Services, who brings with them their outreach skills and working with homeless individuals and PD. And uh, this trio really working alongside each other, really engaging individuals who appear to be residing in the subways to really engage them, to identify, plan, and coordinate this connection to behavioral health services. And the goal is, of course, shelter services. So our role was via the RNs. We trained and we provided the RNs with the tools that they need to work alongside the professionals from the Department of Homeless Services and PD to really provide that behavioral observation and engagement and really assess the need. And with the skill set from the partner agencies, really try to connect, engage, and meet their needs. And I can say that for over 2 years, the program, and it's still going. We have now transitioned that to DO8, to Department of Homeless Services. We have engaged over 200,000 individuals. So through this kind of team partnership approach, it really made an impact. It really, in how we engaged the individual and how we utilized each other's resources to really make it impactful and sustainable. Another program that we're working on really, it's been in the news. You may have heard about the asylum seekers. That has been really at the forefront. So we're working to provide emotional support. I'm sure all of us who on this call are working in some way or another to provide support. So what we're looking at is providing emotional support at respite centers, at the application assistance center, and really looking at this population who has been traumatized pre-post migration and they're still going through trauma. So really looking at their needs and connecting them to long-term service. Our goal is to connect to needed services so we can begin creating new healthy New Yorkers. Uh, we have more than 189,000 people who have sought asylum in New York City. The dialects, Spanish was the top spoken language. It's really shifted the demographics to now it's Wolof, African dialect of Wolof, followed by Fulani and Spanish speaking. Large proportion are families, including pregnant women. And really, they're experiencing ongoing trauma, whether it's physical and mental health services. Their need is really apparent. We have over 64,000 asylum seekers in care currently in our housing in New York City's care. And we're running more than 125 temporary housing sites. So not an easy feat, but I think collectively and through partners like all of you, we really can meet the work to meet their needs. I'm going to stop here, open it up to questions. And I want to emphasize that right now we're looking to build up. Unfortunately, attrition occurs, and a lot of our REST members have either retired or have moved on. So I'm going to be reaching out. My goal is to reach out to the member agencies of VOAD to look more at how we can train your mental health professionals, because when the time comes and we need to respond to the emotional needs, everyone knows resources. It's really dwindling, especially when there's competition for such a small resources that we would love to train your mental health professionals who are willing to be part of response. In the past, we worked with Sanders through DPO and Vibrant. We've taken each other's trainings. And I shared with Amy earlier before the training start that we look to partner with them more. Because we all have the same goal, and that is a healthy, healthy New York, and really a resilient city so we can continue to thrive and work together. So that is what I wanted to share today. And thank you for the opportunity to share what my office does to plan, prepare, and respond for New Yorkers. And I look forward to continued conversation. And I'm going to share my email. Please reach out. I will definitely respond to your email, and I'm going to end there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Adela. We do have a little bit of time. Does anyone have a question on what's just been presented?
I have one question. Hi, Adele and PJ Tedeschi. Does
Right.
your REST team reach out to volunteers and community members or just community members?
When you say we reach out, what do you mean? Do we reach out to?
Like volunteers that are responding or staff people that are responding to disasters, or is it more just to educate the community or respond to them after or during a disaster?
So, great question. Thank you, PJ. At a response site, if I've posted an event and there's REST team on site, there are to provide support to everyone on site. So that's staff, incoming members alike, anyone who is at a response site, anyone who's in need of emotional support. So that would include volunteers, leadership, and yeah, anyone who's in need of support will receive it from a trained REST responder.
Thank you.
And I do want to add that the REST team is made up of staff When we are responding, they're reassigned to this role. But we also work and we look to reignite our relationship with MRC. So the public has an opportunity to become a rest responder via MRC. So that is something to think about. You can take back to your respective agencies. If you have mental health professionals who I would love to do this work, we welcome that through MRC because they do the credentialing and they ensure that people have the credentials needed to do this work and they're indemnified. In addition, when we work with CBOs who are providers, who are contracted with Department of Health, we can train and utilize reassigned staff because they are also um, welcome and covered via the agency. So I do want to share that. So that's my little plug for MRC.
Hi, Adela. Eric Yurovich, if I could ask just a quick question. So the resilience and emotional response team, do you have essentially like a discrete, ready-to-go unit that deploys immediately and then is filled in from behind with additional people? And if so, what disciplines are represented on that sort of first response team?
It's a good question. And so I'm going to respond this way. If if it's a big event, that's when we will utilize the rest team. So that means our mental health professional staff is the first wave that is used to deploy as the rest responder. So that means we utilize our staff, and those are staff who are licensed social workers, psychologists, um, psychiatrists, licensed caseworker, therapists. So someone who has that license, or someone who has a degree coupled with experience. So that is the first wave of emotional support rest responders. If it's very large, that's when we tap into our MRC, who also meets the same criteria and is also licensed.
Thank you.
And I love your background.
Great. And any other quick questions?
I just want to leave off with we're looking to do more training. So if you're interested in training, we really are targeting those BIPOC communities. We have trainings offered in 10 languages. We're looking to build up the Spanish trainings. Our trainers come from the community that they're training in. So really, so they're seeing a reflection on the trainers. And definitely addressing those BIPOC communities to really address the inequities that was really brought even further to light during COVID. We do have our mental health first aid training, which 40% of participants are identify as African American. So I think that really reflects that we're trying to really address the inequities that have been um, for so long systematically in our communities. So if you're interested in training, please feel free to email me. And our offerings includes anywhere between community wellness and resources in Spanish and 10 languages. We have mental health first aid, and the list goes on.
Great. Thanks so much, Adela, for joining us this morning and all that the health department provides. Just as we wrap up, I will note the Department of Health, along with some community emergency networks, are holding their third annual conference here on Monday, the 20th of May. It's an online meeting, 10 to 12:30. Some good topics there: financial insecurity, food insecurities, psychological support, even AI in disaster work. And a few of our members, East Harlem Co-ed, LES Ready, Staten Island Co-ed, are part of that conference. So we encourage you to be part of that as well, if you're available for that. And then just look for This is our May general meeting. We will have a June general meeting. They're always the second Wednesday of the month at 10 o'clock, and we're keeping the Zoom for now. So please look for announcement of what that will be. Laura, I see your hand as we're wrapping up.
Hey, Zach, thank you very much for mentioning that conference on Monday, May the 20th at 10 o'clock. I did drop into the chat the flyer and also the link to register. Two of the sessions actually will be on mental health, so as well as other topics that you mentioned. So we really do encourage the community who interfaces with the public during emergencies to attend this annual conference that brings together all of the coalitions. Thanks so much for highlighting.
Sure. Thanks, Laura. That's helpful. All right, all. Thanks so much. Thanks for joining the screen. See you on the next one. Bye.
Bye, and hope you're well, Madeline.